I am Ed Metz from the U.S. Department of Education, where I lead the Small Business Innovation Research Program, which provides funding to developers to create the next generation of education technology to support students, educators, and administrators. Welcome to the 8th Annual Ed Games Expo, a showcase of game-changing innovations in EdTech that were developed through programs at the Department of Education and across government. During this year's expo, 5 of the country's leading EdTech developers have created How the Learning Game Was Made video. The purpose of the videos is to show students what it takes and who created the different parts of the learning games. Students can connect watching the video to their own education experiences and think about the roles and careers that they would want to play in creating a game in the future. Emerging forms of mixed reality technologies for classrooms, including virtual reality and augmented reality, immerse and engage students in rich experiences to apply learning and provide opportunities that would otherwise not be possible. Today's event features HoloLab Champions, a game where students wear a VR headset to learn how to do chemistry experiments in the context of a reality television show. The intervention was created by Pittsburgh-based developer Schell Games with an award from the program I lead, the EdIES SBIR program. Since being launched in 2018, the industry award-winning HoloLab Champions has been used by thousands of students around the country. After watching the video, stay tuned for a Q&A with members of the Schell Games team, as well as a group of students. Now, off to Schell Games in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Welcome to the greatest event in the galaxy!
Hello everyone, this is Dwayne Waite, Marketing Manager here at Schell Games. Thank you so much to the Department of Education for letting us be a part of the How the Learning Game Was Made series. We're going to talk to you about one of our experiences, HoloLab Champions, a virtual reality lab practice game show. Let's see some of the trailer.
The traditional chemistry lab finally has a modern companion. Developed with input from chemistry teachers, HoloLab Champions is an immersive, safe, and entertaining environment that makes mastering lab skills fun. As game show contestants, players can perform a variety of lab challenges, leading to a show-stopping final lab. Or, in practice mode, they can hone their skills on specific tasks. Players are scored on accuracy and safety as they perform work that prepares them for success in a real lab. HoloLab Champions is the chemistry lab companion you've been waiting for.
Okay, so you saw the trailer. Now you get a chance to talk to some of the team members who were involved in designing and developing the game. So we're going to talk to one team member at a time, and then at the end, there'll be some question and answer. So with that being said, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our CEO of Schell Games, Jesse Schell. Take it away, Jesse.
Hey, thanks very much, Dwayne. My name is Jesse Schell. I'm the CEO of Schell Games, which is a video game studio here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Here in Pittsburgh, we have about 140 people who make video games for a living. It's what we do. We're typically making about 8 different video games at a time, and we make all kinds of games. We make entertainment games and virtual reality games and games that people play in theme parks, educational games, and games for health. The mission statement for Schell Games is we make experiences we're proud of with people we like in order to make the world a better place. Sometimes we make the world a better place through entertainment, but other times we do it by trying to make things that teach something or help people with something. The game we're talking about today is HoloLab Champions, which is our virtual reality chemistry lab game. The way we got started making this is we're big proponents of virtual reality. We love virtual reality. I've been doing virtual reality for 30 years. I started doing it as a student way back when it was in its early days, way back in the 1990s. And then I was doing virtual reality at the Walt Disney Company, and then teaching virtual reality at Carnegie Mellon University. And as part of Shell Games, which Shell Games is something I've been running for 20 years now, when virtual reality started to come into the home, we got really interested in trying to figure out ways we could do stuff with it. And since we love educational games, we started thinking about how could we do things with bringing VR into the schools. We looked at what would the schools really need. And one thing we saw was that chemistry labs were a challenge at all schools, because here you've got a situation where you've got students coming in and they're working with glass, toxic chemicals, things that are dangerous. These are things that take practice and you want to get them right. And the idea that we could have a virtual reality chemistry lab where you could kind of get more familiar with lab practice and go into it feeling more safe, more comfortable, seemed like something that was really interesting. So we started talking to teachers about it, and they agreed that absolutely yes, a virtual reality chemistry lab would be something that we'd want. And part of the reason we saw that would work well is virtual reality is best when you're actually manipulating things with your hands, because that's what VR can do. You can actually, you put on the headset, you're looking into this world, and you can actually reach out and touch and manipulate things. We realized that would be a perfect match for a chemistry lab. Roughly a dozen people work on this for, I think it was about 1.5 years. It takes real time to get things like this done. The way we got the project going was we realized that the Department of Education was interested in helping to fund things like this, because virtual reality is still very new. It's not like there's VR in every school, but the Department of Education is always interested in, hey, let's see if we can help companies find ways to build the future. And we saw this was a path to the future. And so we applied for some funding and were able to get that project funded. And as a result, we were able to build HoloLab Champions, which was super fun. At this point, I would like to hand it over to Dr. Brooke Morrill, who is our Director of Education. Because in making educational games, we've got a lot of people who know about making games, but we also need to have a good handle on education, the right ways to educate, the right ways to work with educators, and the right ways to figure out, is our game actually educational? So I'll let Brooke take it from here.
Thanks, Jesse. We came up with the idea for our HoloLab Champions when virtual reality, or VR, was just starting to become available to use at your house. So we knew that immersive VR could do just amazing things for education, and we wanted to build something that combined all the best parts of VR and games and learning, so that when schools had access to VR equipment, there were already high quality experiences ready for them to play. For the HoloLab Champions project, we actually applied for a grant and we got it, which is very exciting. Our grant funding came in 2 phases with 2 different goals. The first phase let us build a playable prototype that basically let players feel like they were in a virtual lab and use virtual lab equipment. To create this prototype, our development team had tons of help from experts. So we had a subject matter expert, which means she was an expert in chemistry and chemistry education. And we had groups of teachers and students, which is, of course, we were developing the game for. We took our general VR Chem Lab concept to high school chemistry teachers and asked them to tell us about the skills and activities that they would want to see in a virtual reality chemistry lab. We expected to hear things about fire and explosions and other experiments that they couldn't safely do in a classroom. But teachers told us that really more important were basic skills like lab safety and measurement and following lab procedures, because that's what students need to know in the classroom and in the classroom lab. After we found that out, we were able to go to the lab of our subject matter expert, and she showed us all of her equipment, how it worked, and answered just so many questions for us. And then we explored the best ways to complete all the different lab skills in VR. So what virtual equipment was easy to use, what wasn't easy to use, things like that. So while our team was developing the experience, we continued to get feedback from teachers and students in order to improve the experience. And then our research partner, Rand Corporation, did some more formal research on the game with teachers and students to make sure that everyone could successfully use it and that it could be used in classrooms. That was all for phase 1. So now we move on to phase 2. And our goal really was to take what we had from phase 1 and create a more full game. Instead of just focusing on completing a few tasks in the virtual lab, we built larger experiments and had different levels and modes and things like that. During this development, we were still working with our subject matter expert and with teachers and students to help shape the game. And we actually got a lot of really important information and feedback from them that changed our design pretty dramatically. So that's why it's so important for us to work with people who are going to use the game at the end while we're building it. But not only is working with experts and teachers and students during development important, but using research is really, really important too. And we did this in a couple of ways for HoloLab Champions. And in fact, we try to do this with all of our educational experiences at Shell Games. During and after development, we work with a research partner that tests how the game or the experience impacts players. This is probably the most common way that people think about research in games. But we actually also use research before and during development to inspire our game and experience design in the ways that help students to learn best. So in this case, we use research that showed the best ways to teach chemistry to students. Of course, to achieve educational goals, we need to craft our game design really carefully. So we tend to ask, what problem are we trying to solve, or what are we trying to teach? And then what activities or things in the real world are effective for solving that problem or teaching that thing? And finally, what technology and what game mechanics fit well with those activities? So in that way, we make sure that our game is based on good research from the beginning, and then it's more likely to have the positive impact on players that we want to see. To talk more about the specific design of HoloLab Champions, here is our VP of Design, Harley Baldwin.
So I'm the VP of Design at Shell Games, and for HoloLab Champions, I also took on the role of project director. So that's somebody who's responsible for the overall vision of the product, making sure that it meets our quality bar. So in terms of the overall design for HoloLab Champions, in phase 2, what we wanted to do was explore some kind of competitive feeling stuff, but not hyper competitive. We wanted it to feel really welcoming and interesting. And so we were very much inspired by things like the Great British Baking Show and stuff like that. We wanted to make a place where people in classrooms could show off for one another, could have fun with the content, all while learning good lab practice in chemistry labs. When we initially started out to make this thing, we really were more focused on building a sort of all-in chemistry lab where you could do anything you wanted. So we started with that assumption, and we went out to teachers and we said, okay, this is what we think we're going to build. What do you think about that? And they said, well, that's interesting. And we said, oh, you don't sound like that entirely meets your needs. What is it that you really, really need? And they said, well, to be frank, what we really need is for kids to come into the lab and into the classroom understanding good lab practice. We realized that there was this gap in chemistry education where there's the academic math part, and then there's the hands-on part, and that there really isn't enough time for many teachers to take kids into the classroom, into the lab classroom, understand the tools, understand the safety practices and procedures they need so that they can get further along in lab practice. They spend so much time just trying to go over that basic safety and how the tools are used. At that point, we pivoted to, okay, the lab practice is the important thing. And of course, if the lab practice is the important thing, you're trying to get students into the lab. And in order to do that, you need to be in that lab classroom. So we really focused on that. We focused on it as both an individual and as a group exercise, so that as every student made their way through the game, they would come out of it much more ready to take on actual hands-on lab practice than teachers were seeing with students of these populations. One of the things that we realized when we started working in virtual reality was that a lot of chemistry education that kids get to do really is focused on books, and it's focused on math, and it's not focused on the joy of using the equipment and experimenting and seeing what happens with the different reactions. So we wanted to bring that into people. But in order to do that, we had to have them be able to use their hands in something that felt like a real lab. So we spent an enormous amount of time working on things like, well, what does it mean to pour a liquid in virtual reality from one container into another? What if if that pouring needs to be accurately measurable? What about a solid, right? You take a powder and you pick up a spoon of it, and can you weigh that? And, can you control how much powder you're putting on your weight load? That kind of thing. We really spent a huge amount of the development time developing basic tools to allow people to get into a virtual lab but feel like they were using their real hands to manipulate real tools, so that when they came out of it, again, that lab practice was something that they were very solid on and they could move on to real lab practice. The other interesting thing about the use of hands is that virtual reality provides something that a real lab doesn't provide. It provides a safe place to make mistakes and to experiment with mistakes to see what's really unsafe, right? So we allow players to break the glassware. We allow players to throw things. We allow players to spill. But every time they do that, they get a warning and their score is affected, so that they understand how important it is that those basic safety precautions are something that they follow. In order to bring this thing to life, we needed a lot of different disciplines to be working in concert, right? My job was to keep a hold of the vision. We had designers making content and tuning those mini labs in order to make sure that they really adhered to the curriculum that teachers were telling us they needed. We had artists working on making the entire environment, characters, labware, the tools, making sure that the space was beautiful, that the characters were brought to life, that you didn't feel alone in the space, that you got great feedback. We had UI artists making sure that all of the huge amounts of information that you need to be successful in the game are presented cleanly, and also that you understand what your score is, how well you're doing. We had sound people working on making sure that every element was brought to life. You can't make a virtual environment in VR feel real unless it makes sounds the way that you expect. It was also an enormous amount of recording for the host. Both was work for the people doing the actual voice acting and also the sound people working through that. And then finally, engineering brought all of those elements together and put them on screen for us, and then helped us polish them until they shone. It took one person months to make sure that when you pour a liquid from one container to another and you're trying to measure accurately, that you can really get that accurate pouring that you're looking for, and that it doesn't feel like a not quite good enough simulation. Everything that you do with your hands required programmers. Our engineering director, Henry, was just so great and flexible. When we'd play the game and we'd say, this doesn't feel quite right, he'd be right there and he'd say, okay, so what doesn't feel right about it? And he'd watch the play tests and he'd write things down, and then he'd come back and he'd say, well, what if I tried this?
Hello, I'm Henry and I work as the tech director for HoloLab Champions. We built the game using the 2017 Unity engine. All of our game code was written in C#, but we did use CG and AGLCell to write our shaders. Shaders are usually used to describe how a material looks and can also be used to describe how it behaves. For our game, we focus heavily on lab interactions, so figuring out how to translate from real world to the virtual world was a big part of making our game. Even simple things like holding a glass and pouring becomes very different when you're holding a controller. The lack of weight and touch takes a lot from the perception of things. So we tried to make sure that we weren't replacing our hands for controllers, but instead we were giving you this special tool that in VR looks exactly like this, so you could manipulate things in VR. That, combined with haptics, vibration, sounds, created a very intuitive virtual world for us. Now, we definitely had a lot of challenge simulating liquids and fluid dynamics in VR. Those can be very costly for the computer to process. So we had to come up with solutions that would enable a good visualization and would still feel real and also interesting. In VR, the players can hold a glass or a container, like the beakers, and look from any angle. And our game needs to properly represent that, including even displaying the meniscus line, which we use for measuring liquids. We did a couple liquid simulation approaches. We did a more realistic approach. You can see that in the very first part when you enter the game, there's an SG logo toy, and you can play with that. And then we did a more simplistic and cheaper approach for the computer throughout the rest of the game. So if you picture our containers, each one inside will have an invisible volume that we can paint up and down to represent how full a container is. We just have to work two other things. What happens when you tilt to pour, and how we detect the liquid is coming inside. So once we got this volume painting to go up and down, now we use the inclination angle and the amount of volume inside to detect when it should be pouring. And we also added a collision around here to detect when liquid would come in from these particles. When we reach the pouring mode, now we are enabling this water effect that we call particle systems to illustrate the water coming out. Of course, the first thing when people come to our virtual lab is throw a glass on the floor. We try to break it. And it's important that we let them do that because that is what the player is expecting. And moving away from that could cause somewhat immersion breaking, right? So everything from glass clinking and touching the table and scraping, the sound effects, the water pouring, we needed to add all that to provide a more believable experience and make our world even more cohesive with reality. I think the last step was we wanted our player to feel like they are in the middle of a TV show. So we added a bunch of brains in the audience back there the player can see. We did that by using a technique called GPU instancing. GPU instancing allows us to draw a lot of geometry with a single call for the computer. And then we also have the ability to change a few attributes such as scale or color for each one of those. And that will give some more organic feel to this. Besides that, we gave the player some camera control. So in other words, they can change the viewer's perspective. So the people outside the game would see it, not what he's seeing, but they could see from other camera angles. Like they can have a top-down camera to illustrate in close what he's doing with the beakers and liquids. And they could also have an audience camera. And this is all to help the classmates be able to visualize the experience in a different way. Now I'll send you back to Jesse to wrap it up things.
All right. Well, thank you, team, so much for talking to everybody about HoloLab Champions. And thank you very much for listening to it. I'm excited that you were interested to find out more about it. If you want to find out more about HoloLab Champions, you can find out more online at hololabchampions.com. If you have a VR headset, that would be an Oculus headset or a Vive VR headset, you can get a copy of HoloLab Champions. You can download it on the Steam store, and you can also download it on Viveport. It's a thing that can be purchased. However, if you're an educator, if you're a teacher and you want to download it, we make it free. And you can just go to hololabchampions.com and find out how you can get your free copy. Because VR in education is something really new, we wanted to make it as easy as possible for schools to be able to get access to this, because we really believe that VR is going to be such an important part of the future of education, and we want to do anything we can to help get that going. It's something we really care about a lot.
Thank you for watching. Thank you for the team members as well for participating in this. Just like Jesse said, if you have any other questions about the studio or about our experiences, please visit shellgames.com, or more about the experience, hololabchampions.com. Now we'll have some members of the team being able to stick around and answer some questions. Thank you.
Welcome back to the How the Learning Game Was Made question and answer session with the team from Shell Games and with an auditorium full of middle school students who are located an hour away in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We have Jesse, we have Brooke, Harvey, Dwayne, and Henry. Oh, Harley, excuse me. Harley, not Harvey. And I'm Ed Metz from the U.S. Department of Education again. And right now we're going to open it up for questions and answers from our students in a middle school in nearby Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Students, are you ready to ask a question?
Looks like we got some students here ready to ask some questions.
So my name is Easton. I'm in 6th grade, and my question is, how do you guys get the sound of the glass?
Well, that's a great question. I could jump in. So when we put sounds into games, there's a lot of different ways that we'll do it. Sometimes we find there are sound effects libraries and we can kind of pull sound effects from there. But then other times we actually create the sounds ourselves. We go into our little studio, and it's often referred to as Foley recording, where you take real objects and you make them make the sounds you want, and you record that and you edit it. So it's always one of those two things, either a database or you make it yourself.
Cool. That sounds like a great job for a student. So if you guys need a middle school student to make some crazy sounds, I think this group here could get involved there. Another question. And thank you very much for that question, by the way.
Hi, my name is Brody. I'm in 6th grade, and my question is, like, when you get the scale and you put the powder on it, like, how do you get the scale to, like, weigh it in, like, real measurements?
Oh, that's a great question. Henry, do you think you could talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So basically what we did there, each element had their weight. And as soon as you pour down, we would detect that the particles were colliding with the weight boat. And then we would increment the scale based on the weight and the amount that you've been pouring onto the container.
Right. So I guess the short version of the answer is with math, right? Because nothing in the computer actually weighs anything. So we assign, mathematical weights to everything. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, like how is the science real? And that's basically what the question was asking, even though it's virtual. Thank you, Brody. Great question. Another question here.
Hi, my name is Dakota. I'm in 7th grade, and I was wondering how you made the glass breaking physics.
Ooh, cool question. Another good question for Henry, I think.
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. Basically, we measured the force by dropping a glass from our standing, and then we got a number, right? And this number was the force that the glass was hitting the ground. And then we decided, well, if it is a little bit like that, we tried several distance from the ground, we dropped, we collected the measure, and then we think, okay, if the number is greater than this one that we liked, then we would just play the breaking glass animation. That's basically how we did it.
And nobody ever drops the glass on purpose, do they?
Never.
I didn't do
Turns
that
out
when
that's-
I tried it
that's-
for the first time.
Turns out that's a primary part of the fun of the game.
True.
Thanks. That was a great question. And another student here.
When the game is being played, is there just one person playing it and everyone else watching it, or watching them, or is there multiple people playing at a time, like competing?
Well, we wanted to try and make it be multiplayer like that, but it's a lot more work. So we decided that we wanted to put the work in making as realistic a simulation as we could. So right now, it's all about a single player experience, but other people in the class can kind of watch and participate. We created some special sort of plans and programs so that there's ways that the other people in the class can kind of help and participate.
Future R&D. There's always a next idea, right? And it's probably endless. Next question here.
Hi, my name is Malik, and I'm in 7th grade. I was wondering, are the experiments like real experiments that you can use chemicals to actually do?
Harley, you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. The short answer is yes, absolutely. We wanted to make sure that when you came out of our virtual lab, that you could walk into a real lab and be able to do those same experiments and apply the things that you had learned. And so we very carefully selected those two experiments specifically because they are ones that most chemistry labs have the materials to be able to do.
Thanks, Malik. Great question. Okay, another question here. They're coming fast.
My name is Chris, and I was wondering if it's going to come out on the Oculus Quest 2, and if so, when?
Oh, that's a really great question. Right now, we don't have plans to put it as a native game on the Quest 2, but my understanding is you should be able to play it through Quest Link. Is that? Yeah. So you'll be able to play it through Quest Link. So if you run it on a PC, hook your Quest 2 up with a Quest Link cable, you can play it that way. Part of the challenge is all the fluid simulation, all the glass simulation, it's more work than a Quest can handle on its own. So it needs the PC to be running it for now. Maybe one day we'll make a native Quest 2 version though. But
I think I'm going to have to ask a follow-up question, and this is of great, I think, relevance to middle school kids who are going to be thinking about being game developers for platforms that don't exist, 10 or 20 years from now. How did you guys, when you started this out, you didn't know there was going to be a Quest 2. So how do you plan for that?
Oh man, what a good question. It is really hard. You have to just, you have to look at where things are now, and then you have to make guesses about what's coming next. And sometimes you guess right, and sometimes you don't guess right. So it involves just a lot of conversation, discussion, and sort of educated guesses.
Okay, so students, a lot of guesswork, but you just got to be in it to win it. So,
yeah.
Okay, another question.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Hi, my name is Vincenzo. I'm in 6th grade, and I was wondering, so in the video showing it, you said like in the background there's like a crowd and all that. Is there going to be an option where you can have those on and off? Because some people actually work better and faster if they don't feel like people are watching them.
That's a great question. We actually do have a practice mode in the game where you are alone in the lab, and a big part of that reason is that it's also a great place to just practice and make sure that you've really got your measuring and your tool use, as good as it can be. But we definitely saw that for some people that crowd could make them nervous, and they wanted a quieter place to practice.
Thank you. I love the rapid fire questions. I think this is the way the question and answer session should always go. I'm going to tell some of the others. Hello.
Hi, my name is Isabella, and I'm in 8th grade. My question is, for the chemicals, powders, and all that, are they going to be the exact color of what they are in real life, and are they going to be labeled?
Good question. Brooke, can you talk about that?
Sure. So we made every effort to make sure that the real world and the virtual world in HoloLab Champions were as similar as possible. So wherever possible, the development team made decisions that were realistic. But there are also issues regarding being able to tell the difference between things in VR, and being able to see how one thing is a particular color so you can differentiate it from another. So I think where liberties had to be taken, they may have been, but we aimed for accuracy. That was really our goal.
Thanks, Isabella.
If I could add, one of the things that we found that was actually really compelling was giving players the opportunity to look at the properties of each of the substances and determine what substance it was. There are certainly plenty of places where you get a substance and it's labeled, and so you can just look up and know what it is. But there are also challenges in the game where you get a substance that's not labeled, but you have tools to measure properties of it so you can determine what substance it is.
Cool. I'm going to sneak in another question here since I'm the host. Developing for a VR headset, as a developer, is that a completely different project as like an app for a phone, or is it kind of the same, but then you figure out how to move it into the headset?
Yeah, it's kind of the same, but it's also kind of different. We use a lot of the same software. We use, for example, the Unity game engine, which we might use for mobile phones or PC games. We'll use that same engine for VR, but you do have to think about different things because of the way you interact is different. The way the spaces are created is different. So it's a lot of the same software, but it's often a really different way of thinking about it.
Thank you. Hey, students, show of hands, how many of you have used a VR headset before? Okay, well, this is a very experienced group, so great. Well, students, how many of you liked using the VR headset?
All right.
Data, real-time data, market research here for you. Okay, next. Steelers fan.
Hello, my name is Peyton and I'm in 6th grade. My question is, how do you determine what their score is on the video game?
I can talk a little bit about that. So there are a number of things that we measure. The number one biggest effective score is safety, right? Did you break any glass? Did you spill any substances? Those things detract from your score. So you start out with a perfect score, and then every mistake you make brings your score down. But then we also have a multiplier for time. So if you are perfectly safe and you are very fast, you'll get a much higher score than if you're perfectly safe and you're very slow. However, if you're unsafe, no matter how fast you are, you can't get a higher score than if you were safe, because we wanted to make sure that the score reflected the values the game was trying to teach. In this case, lab safety is a big part of that.
Cool.
True, and if I can add, we also added accuracy as a third element to factor in. So as close as you are to the actual result that we would like, the higher will be your score.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of ways to increase your score. If you really want to try and get that top score, it's a lot of things, and we thought that was part of the fun.
Okay, next.
Hi, my name is Dylan. I am in 6th grade, and I was wondering, this kind of adds to what Peyton was saying. What happens if you completely fail the experiment?
That's a good question. Harley, you got something on that?
Well, there's no failure you can't come back from, right? That's true in life, and that's certainly true in HoloLab Champions. So let's say that you somehow manage to sweep all of your glassware and all of your chemicals onto the floor, and it's all gone and you don't have any more. You can just pull that handle to restart the whole experiment over again and try again. We really wanted people to have a safe place to experiment with the mechanics of the game in whatever way they were interested in. And sort of work their own way towards success.
Yeah, we certainly see lots of people play in different ways. Dwayne, I know you've overseen a lot of the watch people play test at a number of events and things. What do you find about people trying to do things wrong on purpose and experiment? Is that something you've seen?
Oh, absolutely. Whenever we take the game to Ed Games Expos and other conferences to showcase HoloLab Champions, a lot of that is them trying to figure out within that environment what they can do, what they can't do, how they fail, and then from there, after they destroy everything, just to Harley's point, they pull the reset lever and then actually try to complete the experiment.
Yeah, because that's one of the great things about the simulations is you can do things you wouldn't do in real life. Everybody imagines well, what if I did this? What if I did that? Well, here you get to actually see those consequences and kind of get it out of your system and seeing wow, some of that stuff can be pretty bad. I wouldn't really want to have to clean up that mess. So that when you're doing it in the real world, you kind of get a little better sense of the right way to proceed and how to be careful.
Great. I'm going to sneak in one more question, and this one's about research. Brooke, you oversaw the research on this project. What's the difference between doing research on traditional methods of instruction versus totally futuristic thinking VR headset-led intervention like HoloLab Champions?
There are definitely differences, but I'll start with the similarities, right? You're still putting a student in a situation in which they're supposed to learn something. So whether that's reading a paragraph, like in our control group, instead of playing the game in VR, students read information, right? You probably do that in classes sometimes. So the similarities are there. You're trying to teach students in some way, but the difference is that we often have to provide equipment and a space to use it, because not everyone has a headset, not everyone has the computer to run the software. So in this case, we actually had to run the VR portions of the research in a research lab that belongs to the partner that we work with, Rand Corporation. So definitely similarities and differences, but the big one involves equipment and experience in proctoring. So proctoring meaning somebody being there to assist with how to use the equipment, what happens if it doesn't work, because sometimes that happens, and things like that.
Great, yeah, and just to reiterate that this was a research-based project, so research studies were done throughout to get feedback from you students and educators to design the game, and then to validate that that the experience is a lot like the real experience. Great. Another question. We have time for a few more questions. How many, Mrs. Perch? How many do we have lined up still here?
2 more.
Great. Okay. So let's get through the questions, and then we'll back to you, students.
My name is Max. I'm in 6th grade, and my question is, how long did it take to make this game?
Good question. I want to say, Harley, I'm not sure I remember exactly. You want to say 2 years? Brooke, Harley, something like that?
I think it was between 1.5 years and 2 years, yeah.
Yeah, the cool part about the way that the grant funding that we got to make this game works is that you start with a small piece or a prototype. And we did that in our phase 1, where we figured out, what works in VR, what doesn't, and get really the base of the game down, and then move on to our phase 2, where we build it out into a more polished experience. So throughout that time, like Ed mentioned, we were working with teachers and students and having them play very broken versions of the game, very not fun versions of the game, to tell us, hey, this is broken and not fun, so that we could fix it and make it the experience that it is today.
Yeah, I was amazed because nothing had really been done when the project started, and within like 6 months, you guys already had a prototype with the VR being used. Is that sort of the normal pace, that you go really fast to get something working and then you iterate from there?
Yeah, that's very important to us, because you'd like to think, oh, I'll plan it all out. I'll write a big document and then we'll just build what we planned. But the problem is, when you build things, you learn about what works and what doesn't work. The things that you come up with in your mind that you think are going to be great, when you really build it, you're like, oh, wait, this doesn't work quite how I thought. So the faster you can build something and sort of see what actually is working, the better, because then you learn things and you can change it. So when we plan all this out, we try and get very good at building things quickly. And it's a special way of thinking, because you have to think very sloppy. You're like, what's the quickest way that I can build this and test it and learn it? And then later, once you actually know what you want to do, then you got to move from thinking sloppy into thinking very detail oriented, because you got to be really careful, because you don't want to ship some software that's a buggy mess that keeps crashing all over the place. So you start out thinking sloppy, and then gradually you start thinking in a much more neat, controlled way.
And what is the term for that? Is it rapid prototyping, or?
Yep, that's the phrase we use, rapid prototyping, which really means just making a sloppy test. Is it just how fast can I build something, that's kind of held together with string and shoelaces? It's as long as it kind of answers my question. That's the best way to do it. So rapid prototyping is a really important skill.
Okay, that's a great one for you students. Okay, maybe one more question, or how many do we have left? I couldn't see.
We only have one more.
Perfect.
My name is Joseph. I am in 6th grade, and my question is, what is the hardest part about coming up with a new game?
Wow. That's a good question. Man, there's so much that's hard about coming up with a new game because you want to come up with something that hasn't been done before, but that people are going to like. I think it's that question. You always got to bring something new, but you also got to bring something familiar at the same time. Because if it's too new, sometimes there's a reason, people aren't ready for it or just isn't going to make sense to them. So finding that place of like new and exciting at the same time. I don't know. I think that's the hardest.
And I would add,
when did you come up with this idea? I'm sorry, Brooke.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jeff.
No, Brooke, why don't you go ahead in terms of what Ed is asking there? Yeah.
Yeah, to just add to the piece about creating a new game and what's hard about it, when you add the idea of making a learning game on top of that, we have some additional things to think about. And I think the first thing that we like to focus on is what are we trying to teach to the player, or how are we trying to change the player, and what features in the game, what actions in the game can best support that change. So we're not going to make the game we want to make and just try to, shove a learning goal in there, because that doesn't work. You guys can tell. I can tell when I'm playing a game like that. So we want to make sure that the learning is actually meaningful to what you're doing in the game so that it's all seamless and a great experience.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is interesting about that combination of ideas is that I find it much easier to make a game that has strong constraints than to make a game that's totally blue sky. Because then I can anchor the design, the ideas, the brainstorms, the team's skills around whatever those constraints are. So in the case of this game, and with it being a learning game, knowing that we needed people to be able to walk out of the game and be a little bit more skilled in the lab was actually something that we held on to very tightly, because it helped us frame every other thing you did in the game.
Great. Well, I think that wraps it up. What a great session this has been. Thanks to the students who took time out of their busy school day to join us. Thanks to the educators who seamlessly kind of got this off the ground, as you guys always seem to be able to do. Thank you, guys. Thanks to our fantastic team with Brooke, Henry, Harley, Dwayne, and Jesse. Once again, I'm Ed Metz from the Department of Education. Hope everybody enjoys the Ed Games Expo this year, and hopefully we'll see you in person next year. So with that, see everybody later. Thank you.